Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our talks with Walt, as we are calling our discussions through each of the poems of the deathbed edition of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to Song of Myself, passage number 24. Now, of course, we're nearing the very middle of Song of Myself. We've said already that sections 20 through 25 have sometimes been summarized as the poet's mystical experience of life. Especially the experience of the self, the development of the understanding of self, from awakening to purification, and in some ways, acceptance of the physical body. We're going to see this in ways that has never been expressed before 1855, Song of Myself. In fact, it was the bold reader in 1855 who made it through all the way to passage 24 of Song of Myself. And then when they got here, they were kind of blown away. Very much like passage 5. Go back and take a look at what we had to say about passage 5. Passage 24 as well will be extremely challenging, and we're going to move through this reading together with a little bit of expectation of, whoa, did he really just say what I think he just said? Now, we pointed out that I really think the key line to read Song of Myself, and I definitely believe that in this passage, is the line from passage 4 of Song of Myself, both in and out of the game and watching and wondering at it. I witness and wait. We're going to have some of that same game being played here. And then as well, I said to you that from the notebooks of Whitman, we had that line, I stand for the sunny point of view. And I think there's a lot to be said for this passage as it relates to that. Now, my hope, and I say this at the beginning of each of these talks, but I hope that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, find the Talks with Walt playlist. And I hope that you are with us for the 24 poems of inscriptions, for the 19 sections of starting from Paumanok, and then, of course, the previous 23 discussions from Song of Myself. Now, there is some debate about who the real Walt Whitman is. And you know how this works sometimes, where somebody will say something and they don't know you very well, and they will go, who do you think you are? You know, that kind of question. And of course, we've pointed out how that question is really the way that we read Homer's Odyssey. Go back and take a look at all of our lectures on Homer's Odyssey. But you'll remember several times, the question of who are you will transmute into a game about names. You'll remember, of course, the famous Odysseus will tell Polyphemus the Cyclops, oh, my name is nobody. Now, it'll be significant that the opening lines of passage 24 in the 1855 edition will play around with Walt Whitman and his name. We pointed out already that in the 1855 edition of this poem, we don't have even Walt Whitman's name on the cover sheet, on the cover page. We will have a picture of Whitman, and then all of a sudden he's ready to jump right into the poem, and of course, Song of Myself. And then we get to passage 24, and we will meet then in passage 24 our real Whitman? Like, he's going to use the actual name, Walt Whitman. Let's just enjoy an actual reading. I know this is a long passage, but I'm going to enjoy just reading this with you because it's so controversial in so many ways and so exhilarating. When this thing's published in 55, it's just amazing. Now, there are a couple of lines that get left out. There's a change at the beginning that we'll have to mess around with. It runs like this. Walt Whitman, a cosmos of Manhattan, the sun, turbulent, flashy, sensual, eating, drinking, breeding. No sentimentalist, no stander above men and women or apart from them, no more modest than immodest. Unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. This is the way the poem opens. And right away, it's like, whoa, 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 what in heaven's name are we reading? Now, to consult with our Nortons for just a moment, we'll hear the comments made about this opening line. Through the first 3 editions, this line read, Walt Whitman, an American, one of the Ruffs, a cosmos. And of course, cosmos was then a word of particular import, hypothesizing the sublime order of the universe and befitting an Emersonian, right, as Walt Whitman was. Briefly, in 1867, the word was dropped, and the line became Walt Whitman, am I of mighty Manhattan the sun. Then restored to read, Walt Whitman, am I a cosmos of mighty Manhattan the sun. And then finally, in 1881, the poet, triumphing over rhetoric, Norton says, achieved the present reading. Now, what's really interesting, again, about this opening line is the way in which, in our 1855 edition, just to go there for a second, the way this opening line, and I read it already, but let's go back to it. Walt Whitman, an American, and we've pointed out in our study already, when we did I Hear America Singing, the word America and American does not occur very often in Leaves of Grass. When Whitman uses it, it's a big deal. Walt Whitman, an American, and then this one of the Ruffs. Now, the great Harold Bloom has influenced a whole lot of what I have to say about Walt Whitman. I've pointed this out in earlier lectures, and he loved to quote this line, and especially the use of this word Ruffs. It is a word that will carry with it a certain notion of the disrespectful and the violent. And we want to, kind of capture a lot of this idea. I mean, remember, just preceding, and in the 1855, remember, there's no numbering at all of sections, so it would be like this: and beat the gong of revolt, and stop with fugitives and them that plot and conspire, and then jumps right into this whole thing of an American Ruffs. And then this thing about a cosmos. Now, what's going on with that? Well, of course, it's a universe. That is to say, he's a lover of all people. And then he will talk about, of course, Manhattan, and that'll make us think immediately of starting from Promenade, the sun. In other words, Whitman wanted to always remember and to say out loud that he was a product of New York. And of course, he loved the city, and he wanted to celebrate the fact that he came from this. Now, of course, the fact that he says, I'm a son of Manhattan, takes us right back to the very first section of Song of Myself, and the very idea of parentage. Remember about coming from this land, and then my parents and their grandparents coming from this land. In other words, I am a part of this thing, Manhattan, this land. Then he gives us 6 words that somehow try to capture who he is. Now, it's interesting that turbulent is the way that it works, and of course turbulent will take us back to starting from Promenade passage 17. Go back and look at the way the word gets used there. But in the original, it wasn't turbulent, it was disorderly. But he changes it, I'll leave it to you to imagine why, to a series of words. Turbulent, fleshy, sensual, eating, drinking, and then, ironically, breeding and breeding. Now, of course, Whitman, to our knowledge, never had children, although there's a huge kind of rumor that Whitman himself helps to kind of create that while he was down in New Orleans, that he in fact had children out of wedlock and all these kind of things. But most scholars today believe that all of this was probably just made up. Smoke and mirrors, fog will be the word that gets used. Notice he says about himself, I'm not a sentimentalist. And his very picture of himself standing there, hat cocked a certain way, shirt open, he didn't look like a dandy at all in that regards, the way that most poets of the day would have themselves photographed or drawn. No sentimentalist, no stander above men. Do you remember in passage 16 how he said that I'm not stuck up? I want you to capture these echoes. I'm going to fight, guys, in this lecture to not point out every one of the echoes, but by passage 24, and as we move into 25, the echoes of earlier lines from Song of Myself, and then of course from the Deathbed edition, all of that stuff from starting from Pomenock. I mean, there's a reason why I said, guys, when we were doing Pomenock, I told you, I said, read these lines closely, all 19 sections, because they're going to help you to be able to read so much more of what's coming, right? And he says, I don't stand above men or women, or even apart from them. In other words, I'm not stuck up. I'm equal just with you. No more modest than immodest. Wow, now this is a big deal, because everybody in 55 knew what he meant when he started talking about immodest. Oh no, here we go, he's going to talk about sex. Right, and we're going to obviously see a number of moments here, starting, of course, with this unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. All you got to do, guys, is go through and just start counting all the exclamation points. I've had students who read all of Song of Myself to count up all of the exclamation points. And again, as we've pointed out in earlier lectures, a lot of that numbering has to do with whether you're looking at the 1855 edition versus the deathbed edition for different reasons, right? And then he will continue, whoever degrades another degrades me. And whatever is done or said returns at last to me. And then in a line that was in the original 55 edition that was edited out, and whatever I do or say, I also return. It's fascinating that that line was edited out. But let's pay attention now to those three lines. Whoever degrades another degrades me. We're going to hear, of course, his comments regarding slavery and his inclusion even of talking about prostitutes and the like. He's going to give us a list here in a little bit of all of those who would seem to be degraded, those who are made fun of, the outcasts. And we've seen this already. He's going to be so unbelievably inclusive in his iconoclasm, right? And whatever is done or said returns at last to me. In other words, I want to be a part of it all. Omnes is of course starting from Palmanac passage 7, as we've said. Through me, he says, the afflatus, that is in the Latin, the breathing in or out, or the blowing on, the inspiration. Think about what we said about logos in the previous lecture in 23, right? Surging and surging. I told you this word urge, the procreant urge, is always there. Through me, the current and index. Loves to use this new language. I mean, think about what it means to be writing poetry during the time when the telegraph is just starting to take off. That idea that there's this incredible current. He loves everything about electricity and Galvin and all of that. I speak the password primeval. The new is the new, as we say. The NEW is the KNEW. I give the sign of democracy. It's interesting the ways that he loves to use his password types of things. He uses this kind of Mason or Masonic kind of language, these secret kinds of different cults that are occurring during his time. And he says, I give the sign of democracy. Now this will take us back to starting from Palmanac. You'll remember passage 10, where he said love, democracy, and the greatness of religion are the three essentials for his poetry. And then, by God, now this will, and with the exclamation point, this will take us now on an ecstatic rant. Now we've seen Whitman doing this in earlier passages, so it won't shock us, although it will shock us. He says, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. Starting from Palmanac, passage 7, omnes, that's this all, this inclusivity is incredible. Then he'll play around with this word through me. Now, again, he's the filter, he's the mirror, he's wanting to be the poet to everyone. Through me, many long, dumb voices. Now, dumb here doesn't mean stupid, although it can. Dumb means what Tilly Olson means in her classic essay, Silences, when she argues that women had been writing and producing all kinds of amazing works of art. It's just that who ran the publishing houses had silenced all those voices. In other words, I'm going to speak for all of the voices that have never had a chance to speak. And then he's going to use this word voices over and over and over again in this beautiful kind of repetition. And as we've said, I mean, he's so melodic because he loves opera, he loves the voice. Notice he says, voices of the interminable generations of prisoners and slaves. It's interesting that in the 55 edition, he didn't have the word of prisoners, and that makes us think about fugitives at the end of 23. And then he mentions slaves, which will take us obviously back to several earlier referencing to slavery. And then we have a missing line from the 55 edition, which is interesting. He says, voices, and again this was edited out, but voices of prostitutes and of deformed persons. Now, deformed we're going to get to. Prostitutes he took out, although we know that already he has said in earlier passages that he's not going to make fun of the prostitute with her pimply neck and, of course, the oaths that are sent at her, right? He will continue voices of the diseased and despairing and of thieves and dwarfs. These are, of course, all the outcasts, and he's standing for them. He's giving them a voice. Voices of cycles of preparation and a creation. This notion of I'm speaking for those who have never had a voice. And then to this idea of preparation and the accretion will give us a geological kind of, it's like layering kind of effect. Of course, immediately we have to think about, I hear America singing as he's playing this game. And of the threads that connect the stars, and of wombs, and of the Father's stuff. And of course there are going to be readers in 55 that go, whoa, whoa, whoa. You can't write poetry about semen. What is wrong with you? By the way, let's do point out, though, that this thing about threads takes us to the Odyssey and the whole thing about weaving. You'll remember that when we studied the Odyssey together in our lectures at learnstrong.net, you can go back and take a look at this, I said that the weaving motif joins the Iliad, the Odyssey, and Virgil's Aeneid all together. And of course, Whitman is playing a very similar kind of game. It's all connected in some way. And of the rights, we think of Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, and of the rights of them, the others are down upon. In other words, everybody is of equal value, Whitman says in my poetry. From the prostitute to the slave to the deformed to the dwarf. And he mentions it. Of the deformed, he brings that back from the 55 absent line. Trivial, flat, foolish, despised. Again, he loves these kind of putting words right in there. Fog in the air, and then he finishes with an amazing line. Some have said only Whitman would write a line like this one, beetles rolling balls of dung. It is an amazing line. It's a fun line to read. And of course, wait, what kind of eye does a poet have to play a game like this? In other words, everything gets included in my poetry, because he says, I am all of those things. A cosmos, I include all of those things. Of course, the fact that he uses fog makes us think of Shakespeare's Macbeth, hover through the fog and fill the air, right? Through me, we're back to it again. It's almost like echoing within even the poem itself. Through me, forbidden voices. And now we're going to get more voices. Voices of sexes and lusts. Voices veiled, and I remove the veil. Now, this removing of the veil, of course, will have obviously biblical connotations with the crucifixion of Christ and the tearing of the veil of the Holy of Holies. But I think as well it takes us back to that pivotal moment in the Iliad, you'll remember, when Andromache will realize that her man has fallen and the veil will fall, and as we say in our lectures, it's such a powerful moment, and it's a symbol that definitely Whitman is playing with as well right here, right? Notice he continues, voices indecent by me, clarified and transfigured. Now, religious readers, and of course from his Quaker background, there would be referencing to the transfiguration of Christ in Matthew 17. Notice, though, he's going to play a different kind of game. I'm going to transfigure. I'm going to recast everything that you might see as obscene, pornographic, unusual, dare we say it, marginalized and not accepted. I'm going to bring all of that into my poetry because I am those things. He says, I do not press my fingers, in the original 55 it's finger, across my mouth. In other words, I will not be silenced. I will say what I must say. I keep as delicate around the bowels as around the head and heart. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. And of course, now you know the origination of our oft-quoted line in room 303. It is an ontological certainty. The only way you got here is two people hooked up and exchanged fluids. That's how you got here. Why is that a grotesque or an extreme comment, Whitman asks. Notice he points out, I keep as delicate, obviously this will take us back to the immodest line earlier, I keep as delicate around the bowels. In other words, I'm going to write, taking us back obviously to the dung of beetles, I'm going to write about the bowels as much as I am the head or the heart. And then of course copulation is no more rank to me. Go back and look at the word rank as it ends up in Leaves of Grass. It's a fascinating study. Then death is, which takes us, of course, back to passage 6 and the idea that it's luckier to die, right? And then he comes back, and we've seen this before, in starting from Paumanok in earlier parts of Song of Myself, in some of the inscription poems, where he will say, I believe. And we're back to Whitman's epistemology, and that fallibilism, as we say. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. But some of this starts to border on a certain kind of absolutism. I believe in the flesh and the appetites. The mystical awakening of a poet to the to the, not just mind and soul, but also to the body. And then, of course, seeing, hearing, feeling, he says about all of them, are miracles. And each part and tag of me is a miracle. So he uses this religious language, and he says, I think that the most amazing miracles are the very fact of my body itself. Divine am I inside and out. Go back to our study of Emerson's essays, and we'll hear lines just like this, very Emersonian. And I make holy whatever I touch or am touched from. It is an amazing idea. And of course, he's playing around with Pauline theology, no question, that all things are holy and acceptable to those who have the correct attitude. Of course, in 1855, who would have thought he would then go to the next line? These next two lines are some, of course, the most famous lines of Song of Myself, and of course from Leaves of Grass. There are students of mine who read these lines and they're like, I cannot believe that he said this. The scent of these armpits, aroma finer than prayer. This head more than churches, Bibles, and all the creeds. Well, amazing. I mean, he's going to write a poem where he celebrates the aroma of his armpits. And he will say about that, it's actually just as amazing or even finer than prayer itself. And of course, you'll remember from passage 1 of Song of Myself, schools and creeds and abeyance, and so he'll play the game. The head more than churches, Bibles, and all the creeds. Right? And of course, no doubt, readers from 1855 on read almost every word from multiple interpretive perspectives. And of course, one of those had to be sexual, and so anytime he's using any kind of language, like here the head, it obviously can be